My fellow Americans, in January of 1776, Thomas Paine published this pamphlet arguing for independence from Great Britain. On this morning, I stand before you to remind you where we've come from as Americans, who we are, and what we have the potential to be. This message is for everyone, but I want those young Americans that are taking their first steps into the real world, those that are struggling with getting their start, those that feel that there's no voice for them at home, at work, or in their community or their government. To both those that consider themselves social justice warriors or those that just couldn't care at all. This is a message for all Americans, not just blues, reds, or purples, or those that are stubborn as mules or old as elephants. All Americans. Thomas Paine put in this pamphlet that society in every state is a blessing, but government, even at its best state, is a necessary evil, and at its worst, an intolerable one. Now, I don't think we're anywhere close to an intolerable evil. Those are governments that we've seen in the past, ones that we've fought against both on our own soil and overseas. Governments that enslave and genocide their own people. The state of our government has become a gerontocracy at worst. Now, why a gerontocracy? Let's talk about it. You're required to be 30 years of age to be a senator in the United States, 25 to be a member of the House of Representatives, and 35 to be elected president. The average age of our government is 60, 58.4 to be exact. Senator Feinstein was 90 and still sitting in office when she died in the past year. Mitch McConnell was 81. Bernie Sanders and Nancy Pelosi are both 83. Former President Trump is 78. And our oldest current sitting president is Joseph Biden at 81. These politicians aren't new, though. They've been around longer than some of us have been alive. I mean, think about it. President Biden was first elected as senator of the state of Delaware in 1972. President Biden was in the political sphere during the Watergate scandal. Mitch McConnell elected in 1984 to Congress, Nancy Pelosi in 84 as well, as Senator Sanders in the 90s. So the shortest number, being Senator Sanders, is 34 years in federal office. Now that's just federal. And President Biden has been involved in politics on the federal level for 52 years. 52 years is older than some of our parents. What I'm getting at is these folks have been there for a long time. Whether you agree with what they've done or what they haven't done, they've been in office for decades. Now, a president can only sit for 8 years total, but a U.S. Congress passes the budget, votes for bills, verifies judges, changes policies, checks the executive branch, amends the Constitution, and votes whether or not we go to war. My fellow Americans, we need to speak to our representatives personally. We need to know who they are. You know, you can call their offices. It's on the public records. With a Google search, you can figure out who is the congressman for your district, who is your local representative. And many Americans don't even know who that person is, let alone remember to go and vote for them. And these incumbents will remain in office for decades. And these politicians that I've just listed are evidence of that. Some of these politicians remain for so long. Personally, I think they need to be voted out. And we need to get this new generation to mold the country to the changing and adapting times that we're facing. Paine also goes on to say that prudence will point out the propriety of having elections often. Now, that's something that I say that as Americans and as a nation, we've held true to. We do have regular elections in the United States, and I've noticed something growing up that a lot of Americans don't know who their district representatives or congressman is. Many people don't know who their senator is, and that's an issue. Our problem is we're always so focused on the presidential election, especially since I was a kid. Mind you, I'm only 27 years old. I was born in the 90s. Maybe it was different before then, but I'm also a historian. And it seems like prior to the 80s in the United States, it was more common to know who your representatives were. You'll notice the older people, especially the baby boomers, if you start to complain about something in your area, a lot of them will say, call your congressman about it. But many of us would never think to do that. But why? Why do we think to not do this? Now I'm going to speak to those in their 20s and their 30s. Many of us have heard statements from our parents and grandparents, the baby boomers and the Gen Xers, such as, the system's rigged already. What can we do to change it? Nothing. It doesn't matter. They've already decided the election. And it just seems like there's so much doom and gloom, and it doesn't exactly motivate us to be involved in politics. But I want to put this in your mind. In 1776, Alexander Hamilton was 21, Thomas Jefferson was 33, Thomas Paine was 39, Nathan Hale was 21, Betsy Ross was 24, John Hancock was 34, and George Washington was only 44 years old. Nothing is stopping you from being the next big change in our nation's history. And thankfully, we're starting to see it. This year, even YouTuber Brandon Herrera, who is 28, ran against his district representative and only lost by 400 votes. Young people, I'm looking at all of you millennials and Zoomers. You're the people, the voice, the next change. You could have the next big idea, the next voice of equality. Hell, World War II veterans have even referred to our generation of having the potential to be the next greatest generation. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from becoming involved in local campaigns to help support those that you want to represent yourself, or being that person to represent your people. If you feel like you can't do that, which I fully understand, I would never want to run for office. But I'm standing here in front of you because I have a great respect, care, and thankfulness to be an American, to have been born here and be given the opportunities that I have been given. But if you feel that it's all too much for you, just go out and vote. In the 2020 election for president, between 60 and 65% of the United States decided to vote. And that is the best voter turnout we've seen in the United States since the 1964 presidential election. Now, is that a step in the right direction? I would say yes. But only 46% of the U.S. on average turns out to vote for a midterm congressional election. And we talked about earlier how much influence in the United States that the U.S. Congress has. So make sure you go out and vote. It doesn't matter who you vote for. It matters that you vote. If you can vote in person or vote in your district, numbers can't be fudged if 100% of the population goes out and votes. Now, if 120% of the population goes out and votes, someone's got to answer some questions. I'm kidding, of course, but how can we talk about a topic like this without having a little bit of fun? Now we're into our most important section. Payne goes on to say, let each of us hold out to our neighbor the hand of hearty friendship. In this year alone, we've had 2 assassination attempts on a presidential candidate and former president. We listen to candidates on stage talk with no facts, and mudslinging is becoming the norm. Protesting other political parties' rallies just to scream at the other side like they aren't Americans. We, as a nation, cannot begin to solve our problems until we talk about them. We need to compromise with each other for the good of all of the people. No one is 100% going to get their way. No one in this country, in the political sphere, is going to get exactly what they want because we are all different. And that's what makes us great. We all have different opinions and different views on topics that are subjective. We can't let name-calling, mudslinging, violence become the norm. We've done that already in our country's history, where violence escalated to the point that Americans kill Americans. Let's not go down that road again. We can't. Another trope that we've heard from the older generation is never talk about religion, politics, or money. I don't understand where that comes from. We live in a country where you can be whatever you want, have whatever political beliefs that you want. Whether it's part of the norm or accepted by the masses, you're allowed to have it. If you want to be a socialist in this country, be a socialist. If you want to be a capitalist, be a capitalist. Any religion is allowed to be practiced within these borders, and any American can rise above their struggles and limitations. Put on them to create a better life for themselves and their families and their fellow Americans. One thing that we've always had the ability to do in our nation, and one thing that's ingrained into every single one of us as Americans, is to fight back. If we think there's something wrong, we don't hold our tongues, we speak up, we act, we do something. Sometimes we act too quickly, though, and we put in horrible legislation that we have to deal with as knee-jerk responses. Everyone has to come to the table and find the solutions for these problems that we face as a nation, the old and the young. So I encourage all of you to love your fellow man, and even if you disagree, we can be friends. You can be friends with people you disagree with. I have friends that I disagree with on every major political issue, but we talk, and we find the common ground. And then we go and we have a beer, or we go to dinner. Discuss things. It's not about winning an argument with facts or logic. It's not about schooling the other person. My fellow Americans, let's use some common sense and come to our senses.